Hi, and welcome to Celebration Bar Review. We're doing a video series about some shifts to take as you think about studying for the bar exam, and the concept of shifts is really suggested by a book I talked about in one of the earlier videos called Shift by Peter Arnell, in which he talks about making some fairly significant changes in the way you do things in your life in order to get different results. Now, today I want to talk about a shift that may be a bit surprising to some of you. It's a shift about thinking with respect to when you should start studying for the bar exam. Let me first describe what the basic premise is that most people use. Most people take their exam, whether it's the first time or multiple exams over a period of time, with the notion of coming out of law school, typically at the end of a third or fourth year of school, and doing nothing but studying for the bar for an intense period of 6 or 7 weeks. And that is the presumed norm. That's what most people think they're going to do. Now, nationally, for about 40 to 50% of the people that do that, they pass the bar. That's the national norm on the bar exam, typically. But that means that there's an awful lot of people for whom that norm doesn't work very well. Now, if you're going to an ABA-approved top 50 law school, and you're in the top half of the class, and you're a prodigious studier, and you've paid attention all the way through law school, and you're not going to do anything after you graduate from law school except study for the bar for 6 or 7 weeks, a traditional bar review course in that time frame probably will work for you, and you've got a better than average chance of passing. But that's a relatively small number of people that we're talking about there. If you're not someone who's attending an ABA top 50 law school, if you're not in the top half of the class in those schools, for example, if you're attending a correspondence law school or a state-approved law school, if you're in the bottom half of a bottom-tiered law school, or even the top half of a bottom-tiered law school, if English is not your first language, if you have failed the bar exam previously, in any of those situations, if you wait until 6 or 7 weeks before the bar exam, your chances of passing the test drop dramatically. In fact, I would tell you that not empirically so much as experientially, I would say you're probably running a 25% chance of passing is all. If you're in one of those categories, you're in what we would think of as a at-risk category, if you will, for passing a bar exam. Now, that doesn't mean you won't pass or you can't pass, but here's the shift you have to make. Too often, what occurs is that we start thinking that because that's what the big bar reviews say to do, to study for 6 or 7 weeks, that must be the norm, that must be the right way to do it. Well, let me give you some insight into why that 6 or 7 week period exists. And I can say this confidently, having run one of the big bar exams for several years. This is the way the thought process goes. A large bar review company has a huge expense in putting on their bar review courses. Typically, they try to do them in some combination of live lecture, although that's less and less these days. But essentially what they want to do is get as many bodies into seats for a relatively short period of time. Now, some of the bar review companies pay inflated premiums to law schools for the use of rooms in the off-season. Some of them pay overinflated prices to professors at certain schools to get them to come in and read scripts for them, again, sort of to have a foot into the market. In both of those situations, what's happening is that the bar review company is essentially saying we want to maximize our revenue and minimize our outgo by having a relatively short period of time in which we're conducting the courses. As a result, the historical tradition was that you would take 6 or 7 weeks, put everybody in, crowd them in as tightly as possible, bring as many lecturers in as quickly as possible, and get through the course in that short time frame. Now that makes for a wonderful business model. I mean, if you think about it, if you can put a lot of people in, you're certainly paying the same amount for the room, whether there's 10 people in the room or 100 people in the room. And you're paying the same amount for the professor, whether there are 10 people listening or 100 people listening. So the economics make sense for the large bar reviews to push everything into that one short time frame before the February exam and before the July exams. The problem is that it's really bad teaching. You see, virtually no one who's involved with teaching would tell you that the best way to learn is to cram or study for 12 to 14 hours a day nonstop for 6 or 7 weeks, trying to push it all into your brain, and then somehow in a burst of adrenaline over 2 or 3 days, you spit all that back out on the exam. And the reality, the numbers prove that out. most people that go through a traditional bar review course don't pass. I mean, the absolute majority don't pass in most cases and in most jurisdictions. And if you look at a jurisdiction like California or New York that has a low pass rate in the 30 percentile range, you really see how fouled up that approach is. Well, what's the better approach? I mean, what's the shift? Well, many years ago, one of the things that I realized was that people learned much better if they took small incremental bites of the apple, if they learned in small pieces, what I described as a stair-step approach. The idea was to learn a little bit, go to the next step, then go to the next step, then to the next step, and then to the next step. But to do that requires time. It requires an incremental approach. Instead of trying to study for 12 hours a day, you try and study for 1 or 2 hours a day, maybe 4 or 5 days a week, but over a period of 4 or 5 months. Now, some of you are undoubtedly saying to yourself, well, I don't have 4 or 5 months to study. You might not. I mean, if you have to take an exam and you're now in something like 3 months or less until the test, you don't have much choice. You're going to have to simply knuckle down and do it. I think home study gives you tremendous advantages here because you can tailor that study to the times of the day that you're available and not the times that the course is being offered when you go sit in a room and watch a DVD or listen to an audio. But more importantly, I think, the shift is that you need to think about how do you pass the bar exam? How do you study most effectively? And in my experience, the best way to do that is to start 4 to 6 months before the test. Using a study guide, a plan like we prepare for our students, you work incrementally in essentially 10 hours to 15 hours a week of study for that period of time. Now, you'll make a little bump in study time when you get into the last 30, maybe 45 days before the test. That's only normal. And I don't think you should feel bad about that at all. But if you've been ramping up slowly at 10 to 15 hours a week, that's pretty manageable. In fact, what really happens from a teaching and learning standpoint is that you consolidate the gains. The things that you learned early on in a course like ours, you build back to, you gain them again, you learn them again, you're reinforced again. In addition, because we don't think memorization is the skill that's really being tested on the bar exam, we're not trying to have you retain that information in a memory sense for a long period of time. We're really trying to teach you how to use the information rather than memorize it, which is another shift all on its own. But the shift that I really want you to think about today is how long you want to study for. Most people underestimate the time it will take them to study. In our experience, in the states that we prepare students for, you're going to need, on average, 250 to 300 hours if you're an average student. Now, if you're in one of those at-risk categories that I was talking about earlier, if English is not your first language, if you're a foreign-trained attorney, if you went to a less-than-stellar law school, or if you had a less-than-stellar legal education at this point, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's not a knock on you or your school. It's just a reality here. But if you're in one of those situations, you need to give yourself more time. And if you try to wait until those last 6 or 7 weeks and then do the traditional bar review course, frankly, the only one you're benefiting is the bar review provider. You're not doing yourself much of a favor. And so I think a big shift that you want to consider here is starting early. Now, in our course, we offer lots of discounts so that the price is better for you if you start early. There's more mentoring time available when you start early. And frankly, we've got a much higher pass rate because our students, in general, start earlier. Does that mean we won't work with you if you come to us 6 weeks before the exam? No, we'll do our best to help you then. But I think if you asked anyone who's actually taken the exam and studied for it, both in the traditional 6-week approach and in an approach like ours that's over a longer period of time, almost without exception, people will tell you that it's better to study small pieces over a longer period of time. I think most people can handle 10 to 15, maybe even 20 hours a week on top of their work or their practice or their other family and life commitments. You get over 20 hours a week, you pretty much are studying full time, and so that's the trade-off that you want to make. I hope that shift is one that you'll think about. We're right now, as I record this, quite a ways out from the next bar exam, so it's a good time for you to be making that approach. And if you're watching this video, my hope is because you're thinking about that kind of a shift already. If you have questions about that, don't hesitate to give us a call or to contact us on our website. Be glad to discuss it with you and in your personal circumstances even further. Have a great week of study or a great week of starting your study, and we'll be back to you next time with another shift in the bar exam.